Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Backley, and I'm the CEO of the Beach Cities Health District, and want to welcome you here tonight as we talk about practicing resiliency during COVID-19 with your family. And very pleased to have you here tonight, and we want to welcome you to our first virtual Families Connected Speakers Series of the 2020-2021 school year. And this series is hosted in partnership with Hermosa Beach School District, Redondo Beach Unified School District, Manhattan Beach Unified School District, and South Bay Families Connected. They've been a partner of ours for a long time, and we're very pleased to be doing this with South Bay Families Connected. So Laura and your team, thank you very much for all you do, and you're a great partner of the Health District. So we're very grateful that you were able to join us this evening. This is a stressful time. There's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in our world. There's a lot happening in our community this week. And we're just very pleased that you're here. And I'm sure our speaker will talk about it. By being here, you're actually practicing what she's going to be talking about, I think. So just want to make a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll turn it over to our speaker. Next week is Red Ribbon Week. Throughout the week, Beach City students and families have the opportunity to participate in a variety of substance use education events, including student assemblies with Stephen Hill of Speak Sobriety and Prescription Drugs and Opioids, What Parents Need to Know. There'll be a compelling video co-produced with South Bay Families Connected, and that'll be happening next week during Red Ribbon Week. We encourage you to visit southbayfamiliesconnected.org or bchd.org resources on tips on how to talk about it. It's a campaign that we've partnered on, and we hope that you will look into that with your family and loved ones. So for tonight, we'd like you to submit any questions for the panelists via the Q&A and chat functions that you find at the bottom of your screen. We're all getting to be experts on Zoom, and many of us really didn't know what Zoom was 9 months ago. So I'm proud of our ability to do that. We'll be actively monitoring these questions and sending them to our speaker tonight throughout the event. So we may not get to all the questions, but we'll do our best and have a dialogue together. So Dr. Kelly Greco is with us tonight. She's been at USC, sorry, Bruin fans, since 2005 as the Assistant Director of Outreach and Prevention. She is also a Clinical Associate Professor and faculty of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Keck School of Medicine. Dr. Greco is also a mom and El Segundo resident, and we're very grateful to have Dr. Greco here with us tonight. And I'd like to now turn things over to Kelly Hendrickson of South Bay Families Connected.
Hello, welcome South Bay family residents, and I am honored to represent South Bay Families Connected as the Director of Community Outreach. And we would also like to thank our partners, Beach Cities Health District and our partner schools. It is such a joy to bring these events together for the community. South Bay Families Connected would love to invite you to check out our website and visit our resources that we have available on a variety of topics, including the one that will be presented this evening. So thank you and welcome, Dr. Greco.
Great, and without any further ado, we'd like to turn it over to Dr. Greco. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be here tonight. And more importantly, I thank you for being here. We know, like Tom said, this is a trying time, as I say, with so much going on with COVID, social political climate, racial climate, online school. There's so much that is in front of us that we are struggling and grappling with. And I know tonight the debate is on. So I really thank you for being part of this discussion. I'm very passionate about talking about this topic. And this is something that we need to tackle and really look at as a community, right? Because it takes a village. So before we kind of delve into all of this, we wanted to do some polls. And one of the polls is about kind of your zip code in terms of really important information that we need. And then I also have just to kind of engage everyone, because like we know it's so different. I can't see you, and still wanting to kind of have a discussion as a collective about resiliency and where we're at. So I'm going to launch 3 questions. And if you, it's all voluntary, give you a few minutes to select, and one of it is in terms of your zip code. And then the last 2 have a lot to do with our topic tonight on resiliency and thriving, taking an emotional temperature in terms of our primary emotions, and then lastly, areas of well-being that are important to us. So please feel free to take just a few moments and put your answers in, and I'll give everyone just a few moments, and then I will end the polling so we can all see together our responses. Great, so lots of responses coming in. And as they're coming in, just wanted to talk about in terms of the 2 that I have on resiliency. The first one is a check-in. It's an emotional temperature. I do with myself all the time throughout the day, especially in the midst of all that we have in front of us that we're dealing with. Checking in with the kids throughout the day is a great tool. And then the last one in terms of looking at the research with well-being and what are the areas that define well-being. And well-being is very subjective, and a lot of how we view our life is going. So just seeing in terms of where do you fall in terms of what is the most important to you with well-being. So give just a few more minutes, and then we'll see what the response is. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. So in terms of, I appreciate, we just wanted to know in terms of where you're zooming in from, in terms of the different area codes and so forth. But why don't we just delve right into kind of what we're going to talk about. And these are 2 really techniques in terms of that are really important to kind of look at. And the first one is always taking a emotional thermometer, right? Reading myself in terms of where am I at? And when we look at that, you know, this comes from everyone is very savvy in terms of knowing the Inside Out movie with all the different emotions. And what we see in terms of is checking in of how do I feel and what's going on with me. And we know as we're going to kind of delve into this of that, our emotional state and our self-awareness throughout the day is key in terms of making decisions and shifting. So knowing what our emotion is, and we see that a lot of people had said that happiness and joy is an emotion right now, which is absolutely wonderful, but also seeing that we're also in a state of sadness and so forth. So again, it's bringing together and integrating the negative and the positive, and really important in terms of taking that emotional thermometer every day, checking in, having conversations, whether it's with myself or with the family or the kids. And here we see these are areas of well-being. And with that, Positive emotions, which we're going to delve into and talk about how do we maintain positive emotions with so much suffering and so many challenges ahead of us every day. And then we see in terms of relationships, a lot of people, 30%, and that is a key component, which we see in the research of thriving. So we'll delve into in terms of what that looks like. And again, kind of wrapping up with mindset and meaning are big components. But again, we know that some people said physical health and economic security, again, all really important areas and things that are sometimes challenges while we're in the midst of COVID. So I appreciate you taking a moment in terms of just kind of seeing where we're at. And something really important as we go into kind of talking about what do I do as a family in terms of, you know, going to a place of thriving, and having those conversations is really, really important in terms of what is it that is helping us thrive, and having those discussions first individually to see where I'm at, and then also collectively in terms of family dinners, checking in, having those discussions, especially with the emotional thermometer. So again, we're going to really talk about how do we practice these skills. And I just wanted to start off with what do we want to accomplish and what's important. And the first part is strengths. You know, one of the things, and these are hopes that I hope that you get out of it, and kind of the goals of the whole talk, is we come from a place of we are our worst critic, and we don't identify our strengths enough, and we don't talk about it enough, right? And so when we see in terms of Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology out of the University of Pennsylvania, has done tremendous work on this, kind of looking at what helps us thrive. What are we doing right? And I think that's a great component to talk about with our kids, of really acknowledging, of pausing and saying, thank you for doing the dishes. Thank you for making your bed, right? We don't do enough in terms of the strengths and what they're doing right. And we don't acknowledge as a parent, what are we doing right? What is working? So really kind of strength-based and focusing on your strengths is I really hope that you walk away and recognize, hey, I'm doing more than I thought I would be. Because we know this is such a challenging time. And a lot of us are looking at, you know, where's the parenting manual for 2020, right? This is a time like no other. And so this is something that we really need to focus on for ourselves and our families. So the other thing too is increasing self-awareness, right? As we know, knowledge is power. And how can you control your stress if you don't know what it looks like? So really looking at, you know, what makes me happy? How do I manage my stress? How do I know that I am managing it? Having those discussions with our children and ourselves are really, really important. Knowing our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and the triggers. So again, that knowledge is what creates the self-awareness that then we know what to control and how to tackle it. Learning a new skill or concept. So I'm giving you lots of resources, lots of wonderful therapists as well as researchers in the field, and kind of looking at taking in what works for you, what resonates for you. We know that parenting is a very personal journey. And so really kind of looking at, we all come from different cultures. We're all very diverse. We have different backgrounds and different preferences. So there's no right way. So being really inclusive in terms of what is it that fits for you, and kind of looking at those skills and those things that resonate. The last thing that I think is really important is that there's a lot of focus in our world of social media with the millennials, the Gen Zs, of the doing, of, you know, how many activities am I doing, and going and going and going. And as we see, and we'll talk later on, that COVID has really hit pause for us from the distractions from that really busy schedule that you and I always had day in and day out. And so we really need to kind of look at, this is not about certain things that I do, but also more so of just being. How am I being in this moment? How am I being in this moment with myself, with my children? And I love the quote that Maya Angelou always says, that it's not what you say or do, it's how you make them feel. And really looking at with our children of how are we making them feel? Are we doing things that contribute to them feeling connected, even though we have the intention, that's our goal, kind of looking at, what am I doing that is being rather than just doing. And if you wanted more information about that too, I got a lot of information from Dr. Regina Pally, who wrote an excellent book on that called The Reflective Parent. And she really talks about how it doesn't cost anything in terms of being with our children. But again, in this age of technology, social media, and the running that we're all doing, that's something that we miss and something that we really need to kind of hit pause and think, how much am I being with that child, with myself as well. So, let's kind of look at the generation that we're talking about. As we look at how do I become resilient with my family, how do I practice these skills, we have to know in terms of what is this generation, what is important. Again, knowing that we're globalizing and generalizing and making these kind of grand statements, but really looking at what are the traits, right? Because we hear so much from our kids of, you don't understand, you're not on TikTok, you're not using social media. So in kind of looking at what is important to them, because we know that this is the generation of digital natives, right? They're forced in terms of like being online from birth on. That's all they know. And so now, right, the biggest challenge that is so many of us with the online schooling is they're on it so much, is you're peeking in their room, right, and seeing, are they still on social media, and getting them off TikTok or Instagram or so forth in between breaks at school. And we know that that's one of the challenges on online school that we are dealing with. But also too, we need to look at this increase of depression and anxiety. And we see that there is so much that is kind of, that they're stimulated in terms of that comes at them, and that they have to kind of seeing more than they need to know. I am kind of like taking, and I greatly appreciate everyone had wonderful questions that they submitted. And one of the questions I think that was really important in terms of, my child is seeing what everyone is doing. And we know that we're all making different decisions, just like with parenting, we make different decisions that are the best fit for us. And some of us are seeing things that they're doing things that are different in COVID and feeling like they're missing out, right? Like the FOMO, the anxiety of fear of missing out, and kind of seeing things and then our child having a reaction. And we know in terms of sometimes that increases their depression, anxiety. Sometimes we know more than we need to know. And we kind of have to look at, how can we help them manage that as well? So we're going to kind of take a look at how do we use these generational differences and these traits to our advantage to help them thrive as well. And I think the last part in terms of being closer to parents is that they are leaning into us as the Gen Z of helping us and looking at us to thrive and be resilient. So when I have parents say, what do I do, Kelly? And I always say, we've got to start with role modeling. We've got to start with, how am I showing these skills, practicing these skills, because that's where it starts. So going to the next slide, it really kind of looks at what I see a lot of times is, and again, doing this myself many times, of we've got to meet them where they're at, right? It doesn't matter kind of in terms of what these different stages are, but does it fit with where they are at developmentally, right? So if someone is, if later in elementary school or middle school or high school, is the parent doing things that they're capable of doing? Are they can reach out and talk to the teacher rather than rely on the parent to do that. So really kind of looking at, am I empowering them? Am I stepping back and helping them make decisions? And because what we see is that every single one of these developmental stages that comes from Dr. Erickson is basically something that they're all striving and all going through. And we need to help meet them where they're at. And again, kind of look at making sure we're not doing things for them, that we're empowering them, and that we're standing by them as they may be falling, making mistakes, making decisions maybe that you hope they wouldn't make, but yet helping them kind of match where they're at. Because we know that sometimes our decisions in terms of are based with feelings that I'm going to be concerned that I can't, fix it, or I can't do something different. And so in terms of another great question I had is someone was saying, if they want me to sit with them during Zoom all the time, what basically in terms of should I do? And having conversations of, looking at, is what I'm doing contributing to not helping empower them and do things on their own, even though they are scared? So kind of looking at that and having that conversation of how can I manage their anxiety and stress, but yet give them that distance to do things. And that's really important. And I always use, in terms of meeting where they're at, is I had an experience with my daughter's third grade teacher, and she said, this is the time where you don't put the homework in the backpack and you don't run to school if they forget it. They've got to feel the consequences, because we know that when they get to college and young adulthood, there's no one there in terms of, helping them with the consequences. And sometimes the consequences at that time are more long-term than in the immediate moment. So I always liked that comment, and it was so important in terms of what we're talking about, of meeting them where they're at. And so some of the times where we can't meet them where they're at, like I said, where it's hard, in terms of, helping them go through these, what we call kind of crises or tasks that are strictly developmental. It's something they need to do to kind of get to the next step, kind of like how that said in terms of climbing the mountain, is we know this is the hardest part of being a parent. It is watching them go through something really tough and not being able to fix it for them. So how can we then not get in the way of that and really kind of look at, how can I step back? And maybe it's due to my kind of own distress, or it's hard for me to see them upset, because we know that that is something very difficult, even including myself. So it's really kind of important to kind of look at, I always say, take fix out of your vocabulary, and it's about managing. It's about managing events, managing emotions, but again, kind of looking at, is this something that I'm doing? And we know that this is the hardest thing to do. And one of the things that we can do is that the greatest gifts that we can give our children are roots and wings, right? And I always use Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania, who is a founder of Grit. She always says that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I think as we look at COVID and how we're all dealing with it, we've got to look at, am I in the long haul, and am I helping prepare and being there for my children every day? So basically, am I pacing myself? Am I being, kind of looking at, how do I do this where I'm not running and I'm just kind of gradually taking this day by day, hour by hour, which is a mindset that I'm using and also teaching my own children to help with that. Because in terms of the roots and the wings, really important, because we know that what we see with Gen Z too is this is a skill that they need to learn in terms of delayed gratification. They want the answers quickly. It's difficult to sit and wait, right? If I'm feeling something really intense, I just want to move through it and I want to fix it. But we know that that's not the case. And a lot of times it's just about managing, tolerating the uncertainty, which we're all doing in the state of where we're in with COVID and our culture and our society. So really looking at delayed gratification is really, really, really important, and something where we need to help support that as well. And I think the other thing, I use this quote all the time in my talks as well, is, and this is from an unknown author, is to raise a child who is comfortable enough to leave you means you've done your job. They are not ours to keep, but to teach how to soar on their own. So really looking at that roots and wings is about, how do we teach them to soar? And one of the things that gets in the way of helping them soar is really kind of looking at, am I the good enough parent? And a lot of times we don't think we're good enough. It goes back to what I said at the very beginning. We are our worst critic, and the first thing we're doing is, what did I do to contribute to them, not being in a good place, or not supporting them, or upsetting them, or not doing enough? And now with us, in terms of parents, we all know we are everything to them with multiple roles. And so I really like taking in terms of Winnicott, who is a goes back to the 1950s of a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst of this good enough mother, the good enough parent, the good enough person. So this is about perfection versus good enough. And a lot of times we're unintentionally striving as parents to be perfect. So we really need to see what are our expectations, and are we saying I'm good enough today, and helping our children recognize that as well. And being good enough leads to resilient children. How? Because we can't be there for everything. Like I said, we have to step aside and sometimes watch them make mistakes and different decisions or be emotional. So it really gives them space to explore, to make mistakes, learn the consequences, and really, really important and necessary life skill. So again, kind of looking at, am I being the good enough parent? And focusing again, like we said at the very beginning, it's about the strengths and recognizing what I'm doing every day in the midst of everything we're going through versus what I'm doing wrong, because we typically start with that. So as we kind of go into all these different concepts, I think it's important of like, what are these words? What is it, right? Because we all kind of loosely use these things. And one of the things that's important is looking at our well-being. And I like to kind of look at our well-being is not the amount of stress or what someone is going through, it's their perception. It's basically their focus. What goals am I focused on? How am I perceiving this? And how am I fighting the Zoom fatigue, the hardships, the demands, the sufferings, the losses, the detours that come into our life every single day now with what we're dealing with. And some days are going to be better than not, but really kind of looking at, if I have a bad day, how could I do it differently? What could I change? What could I do differently? And this is something really, really important that I think we need to show our children as well as teach. So it's very subjective in terms of when you ask about my well-being or yours, how is life going for you? Again, are you getting meaningful relationships? Are you having meaningful goals? And really kind of looking at, it's that top kind of level of optimal psychological functioning. Can we have this in COVID? Yes, but it really depends on, are we then responding to the stressors in a way that gets us to that optimal level? So looking at this, what is this when we talk about surviving while thriving, right? We see a lot of that in the media and the literature. What does it look like? Well, you and I know very well in terms of surviving. We are surviving every day in the midst of all of this. We are possibly fatigued every day. I'm hearing I'm not motivated. It's difficult to kind of be that person I was before COVID. And so we're looking at this as a state of crisis and feeling overwhelmed more often than not. But we can get to that point with ourselves, our children, and our family in terms of looking at some key components that we see in the research. Two things, and I have it on the slide: accepting and learning. So those that, even though they're surviving, they're looking at what's in front of me. How can I accept it? I'm not okay with it. I would rather be in the classroom than on Zoom. I'd rather be with my friends, right? Our children saying, than in my room alone and talking to them online. But it's about in terms of accepting this is where we're at and what am I going to do about it? So what we see in the literature, the American Psychological Association says this is about adapting to adversity. And you and I know we are knee deep in adversity. So how am I going to adapt? How am I going to not stay stuck where I can't function and I'm not getting to that place of I'm learning things about myself, my family, my environment, my community, life in general, and how do I accept that what's in front of me is there and I've got to make decisions to make this work and get to a place that's going to help me thrive. And resiliency, we see, this is a coping skill. So this is where as a child or an adolescent or a young adult, I get a bad grade, or I'm in a fight with a friend, or in terms of I don't get something I want. It is a detour, it's a loss, and we then bounce back and recover. So it goes back to adapting to the adversity and recovering after I have some kind of loss. So I think the most important thing to leave you with this is what the research repeatedly says is, and I think as a parent, including myself, I'm like, what are the ingredients for this? What do I need to have a thriving, resilient family, child, and even myself? And that is with the family and a child, you need one caring and supportive family member, someone in the family, or someone even outside of the family. So it goes back to, we've got to role model and reinforce this, and that's where we start. This is a learned skill. This is not of, I was born with this, it's a personality trait, it's learned. The other thing that I want to really point out is that this is something that takes practice, we'll talk about, and we have to move through the emotions. It's not about, I accept that, online Zoom and learning this way, I'm going to accept it, right? There is a process, and we have to help them understand that there is a process in this, and it doesn't just happen. But that's the end goal in terms of accepting it, and that's where we want to move toward. So, we all know in terms of that we are here talking about the impact of all the global events, like I said, social, political, racial, climate, COVID, everything. And with all of that, there are three things that really stand out to me. And that is, we are in a state of uncertainty. You and I hear it all the time in the news, in the media, that there is uncertainty. And with that uncertainty, we've got to then focus on, how do I make predictability happen in my house? How do I create the structure and have a predictable environment in this uncertain time? Lastly, threatening. There is so much coming our way that's threatening to us medically, psychologically, to our well-being. And again, these skills and tools we're going to talk about of how to perceive it differently and respond differently. And we know that what is really trying and wearing on us is that it's long-standing. So going back to, this is about a marathon, not a sprint, and really being kind to ourselves and acknowledging that we are sometimes in the midst of this going to have more hard, tough days, and telling our children that more often than not. This is a new norm, and I know a lot of people say this, but this is kind of a new sense of being, and so a lot of firsts, and so with a lot of firsts, there's a lot of uncertainty and not knowing, kind of like, well, I haven't been through this, so I don't know how to deal with it, of knowing that this is how it is, and I'm going to fight and move forward. And with, in terms of this kind of acceptance and kind of resilient stance, we look at that this is about, in terms of what we're all under, loss. This is loss of not doing the things I used to do, the loss of not being part of the community at school, part of that extracurricular activity that that child was in, or sporting. So it is loss on so many levels, and we are going through the stages of grief and in and out of it. And so we know that things are changing, rules and regulations are changing, statistics are changing, expectations are changing. So just kind of normalizing and validating, this is about loss and grief, and I'm going in and out of the anger, denial, bargaining, depression, but the end result always comes back to, like what I said, is about acceptance. That is our goal, and people that thrive don't fight that. They try to get to the acceptance by moving through all of these different stages. So I think it's really important as we look at that. And with that, with our new norms and with kind of grief, we see that lots of us are more irritable than not most days. I think that is the norm. Why? Because our daily schedule in COVID is about, it constantly lacks boundaries, lacks transitions, include multiple roles. So I actually took a picture of one of the doors in my house because of this very reason, right? You are dealing with getting on a staff meeting, dealing with a child in front of you that may be tearful because they can't get on Zoom for school and they're afraid, I can't get on, or they're struggling with an assignment. Someone's knocking at the door because your groceries are being delivered. Your phone is going off with all these different apps that you have to keep up on with work or with your extracurricular activities. We are overstimulated every minute of the day. And so the boundaries are not there like it used to, right? Sitting in school, sitting in an office, or sitting at my home, and I have some alone time. So how do I create the boundaries? And we need to do that. And one thing I did was the first sign to the left of, my husband made the Dr. Greco is in session sign to kind of keep those boundaries and help the kids know mom is working and she can't talk right now. And then it became a family event with my daughter making a sign. And then I thought it was really funny because I think as we get into this even more so, the boundaries are becoming more difficult. And we got this sign, which is kind of fun in terms of, sorry, we're closed. But really looking at, it's lacking transitions, right? The transitions of walking to school, driving to school, driving yourself to work, those transitions, walking in between classes when you're at school, in terms of if you're a child or adolescent, that's all been taken away from us. And those transitions are what gives us breathing room. It's what kind of helps us naturally go from one task to another. And again, we don't have that. So this is what's causing a lot of conflict, in my opinion. And someone had a great question of, you know, the siblings are fighting. What do I do? And I think we need to look at, how do I hit pause, get some timeouts and create space, and really look at how do I create boundaries that are not there and really increase the transitions, and look at, we are in multiple roles. We have got to continue to strive to be good enough. You and I as parents are sometimes the coach, the therapist, the best friend, the teacher, the parent, right? Everything. And so this is really, really challenging. So in this challenge, what do? We have got to look at what we can focus on in terms of what can I control. So like I said in the beginning, this is about uncertainty needs the predictability of my environment. I got to create that. I'm having conversations all the time with people of, so when you sit down every day, is your schedule kind of mapped out hour by hour? And if it's not, helping them do that, no matter how old they are, and helping them kind of go through. And again, how I'm getting through this is really looking at sometimes hour by hour and day by day, taking it in chunks of time really helps create that predictability and keep it more kind of focused in chunks of time and something that is more manageable. So going with the flow, I love this image. And I think for children or adolescents, the image of a wave or a roller coaster that we say, in terms of life is up and down. So how are you going to ride the wave? And this comes out of positive psychology. And so when your day goes down, which it does, and the wave comes crashing onto you, how are you going to recover and make decisions that help you catch your breath and come out of that wave, or the image of a roller coaster? So how am I going to go with the flow and make decisions? And we'll talk about that. Managing expectations. This is really key. Seeing a lot of people, and again, I was noticing with myself too early on with COVID, is expecting myself to do things that I did before COVID, right? So I always say, now I may be able to get 1 or 2 things off my to-do list, and before COVID, it may have been, I've been able to get 10 things. So really helping your children and yourself manage your expectations, that it looks differently, and we've got to lower the expectations, because that will then help us reinforce of, I can do certain things, but be more realistic, rather than sometimes it's unrealistic what we expect ourselves to do, which then creates the stress and doesn't help with us being resilient. We don't want to dismiss the basics. Eating, sleeping, and exercising. Those are the basics you've heard all of your life. They are key. We've got to keep them in the forefront, especially for our children. What do those 3 things look like? How can we do it? Even if it's a little exercise, it's not what it used to be, of going to games and practices multiple times a week and games all weekend. But what does it look like, and what can we do differently? And then the last thing too, in terms of, is triage versus balance. So I train a lot of individuals, and a lot of times people come to me and say, can you give me some advice of how do you manage professional life and family life? And I said this one time to one of my trainees who had a family. I said, I don't believe in balance. It's about triage. And it was so funny, because that kind of mantra set with that person. And I really believe that that's kind of how I live my life with everything that we have to juggle as parents. It's about triaging. What's the priority in front of me every hour, every day? And in the midst of with COVID, is what do I need to triage, versus there's always going to be something off balance, but really triage is my goal, versus kind of balancing. And it kind of helps me in terms of that I am accomplishing and getting things done in a more realistic manner, like lowering the expectations. So I really like, in terms of, we've got to focus on what you all said in one of the polling questions, is positivity, right? Let's reframe COVID. We know the power of our thoughts is so important. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interrelated. They all interact. Whatever I think about myself is what I'm going to do and feel. So are we living in the present moment? Yes. And so much of it are saying, again, the world has come to a pause where the distractions are lifted, and this is why I'm thriving, because I'm living more in the present moment. We're all being more vulnerable. We're having to kind of look at, how am I feeling? How do I deal with the loneliness? How do I deal with the boredom? So this level of vulnerability is something that is where we're exploring it. It's right in front of us. And the more vulnerable we are with our children in terms of, I'm stressed out and I'm having a bad day, and this is what I need to do to take care of myself, really helps model and reinforce what they will do for themselves too, in terms of using those coping skills. Values, in terms of, we're all looking at, what do I value? What's important? So it goes back to, some of you had put on the polling, what's meaningful? That's across the board in terms of research, with living a life that is something that I am practicing, the values that I believe in that are important to me. And again, learning the new skills and opportunities. So how do I do this? It's the 3 Ps of, you've got to make mental health a priority right now. This cannot take a back burner or a side seat. It's got to be in the forefront. What do I mean by that? I mean in terms of that you are thinking about it and prioritizing it on a daily basis. So kind of like how I said, if I'm having a bad day, my child's having a bad day, of what could you do differently? How could you have responded differently? What could you have done differently? And really looking at, how can I prioritize this and practice it? No matter how old you are, how much knowledge you have, you've got to practice these skills, and practice it even more so in COVID. And you've got to have a plan of action in terms of what is your coping. So we see with this bell-shaped curve, this is what we want to strive for. We want to know with our self-awareness, where do I fall? This is peak performance in terms of the optimal performance. We all cannot be at the peak performance 24/7, but how can I get there? Again, what is the goal? So knowing if I'm falling in the orange or red is really key. And I use a scaling question that comes out of solution focused, of rating yourself from 1 to 10. And a lot of times we go to the doctor and they say, rate yourself from 1 to 10 in terms of pain. Rate yourself 1 to 10 in terms of stress. 10 being really stressed out. Asking your kids, where are you from 1 to 10 today? And if you're a 5 or higher, you got to make different decisions and do something different. Take something off your plate. Make sure you go for a walk. Maybe I need a nap. Maybe I need to take, a break. So really kind of looking at, how do I get to that optimal performance? Because if I stay stuck in the orange and the red, then that means that I'm not going to get to that place of thriving and resiliency in terms of acceptance and learning and getting to that optimal level. So self-awareness is key, and making decisions, just like I said about the wave. So how do we make decisions, especially like I said, when the wave comes over us, is we look at the 3 coping styles. You and I, our kids, all do it. So this comes out of Lazarus and Folkman, which I think is really excellent info for us. We cope in 3 ways. We're either emotional, avoidant, or we problem solve. But those that thrive are resilient, problem solve more often than not. And with that, we see, what are my resources? What's my support? Am I leaning in on them? What are the choices? What are the decisions that I can make? And we really see with kids, self-efficacy is incredibly important. That is the belief that I can do it. And when you take this stance of problem solving, you then take the approach and you then go, I got this, I can do this. And the belief that I can overcome this, even though it seems overwhelming, is important. So really looking at, where am I? And when I'm stuck in the emotional and avoidant, I want to seek the problem solving and go towards that as the goal. Because what we see is, we're stuck a lot of the time in the emotional because of negativity bias. We go to the negative. I always have people say, Kelly, why am I always thinking negatively? And think about all the negativity that comes our way with media, social media, conversations, things we're seeing. We are overstimulated with the negative now with what we're in, but expect the negative. Our brain is wired to go there to protect us. It's a form of survival, right? So if I see a lion over there in the corner, I need to know that's a lion so that my body starts going into fight or flight response. Adrenaline sends messages to my brain that I need to run. But now, we're getting messages to our brain of, it's unsafe or a threat if we don't have enough likes on Instagram or social media, right? That's something that's very true for our kids in our day and age of technology. So really, in terms of, we've got to look at, how do I perceive stress as a challenge? I have 2 research at the bottom in terms of Dr. Matty Salvador, who has the 3 C's of resiliency. And he talks about, you are perceiving it as a challenge, right? You have to focus on what you can control, like I said, and he says it's about focusing as a challenge, my stress coming at me, and then committed to the goals. And so I'm always looking at how is the glass half full? And if I can't find out, I ask others around me to help me have that conversation, because we really need to practice positivity. It's not going to come naturally. Our brain is going to take us to the negative. And when we go to the negative, we are thinking of negative thoughts about ourselves. Like I said at the beginning, we're our worst critic typically. And even before I open my mouth, I know my child is like, oh, they're going to say something negative or what I didn't do, even though maybe I may say something positive. So they expect that we're going to say something negative. So we need to kind of look at how can I trash my negative self-talk? And I think it's a great image of whether it's a visual or whether you do it with your child, of writing down of, I think the classic is I'm not good enough or I'm not smart, and then putting it in a piece of paper and throwing it in the trash can. And again, giving yourself 3 points if you make it, and really kind of looking at how do I trash my negative talk? And really, really kind of important in terms of what we look at, because we've got to trash our negative talk because our emotions are attached to what we say to ourselves. We've got to shift in terms of looking at how do I talk to myself where it's more balanced, where it's more positive, and I'm focusing on the positivity or the gratitude. And so what we see is that we have got to look at self-compassion. And I always tell individuals, selfcompassion.org is a great website. Kristen Neef is the founder of Self-Compassion with lots of wonderful books and resources, because we've got to look at how do I turn down that critical voice. And with that, we also have to manage, not fix, but manage the emotions. So really telling parents, don't label it as good or bad, really look at it as we've got to integrate the positive and the negative, right? Not labeling it really is important, because if we label it bad, they will go away from it and not want to deal with it and push it away. And then sometimes that comes up physically for us. Headaches, backaches, physical symptoms. So we really want to take a stance of we all have negative and positive. We've got to integrate it. We've got to give ourselves permission to feel what we feel. Really valuable. And I think in terms of looking at, don't be afraid of the negative emotions. Everything gives us information about ourselves and our environment. It's valuable information that gives me meaning, that I can learn more about myself and my environment. And really looking at how do I normalize and validate that a lot of us are having much more negative, bad feelings throughout what we're all dealing with. And so what we see is, can you practice happiness? Yes. So this comes to the behaviors, right? We see that Dr. Sonia Lubronsky is a researcher out of UC Riverside, wonderful researcher that's done so much on happiness, wrote a book on How of Happiness. And she talked about these intentional behaviors are things that you and I can do, because when you look at it, what determines our happiness is actually intentional behaviors and activity. So there is a genetic component that is about 50%, and there's a 10% of circumstances, like if I win the lottery, or for a student, I get a good grade, but it's really that 40%. It's about expressing gratitude, being optimistic, avoiding overthinking, savoring life's joys, learning to forgive myself or others, nurturing relationships. These are things that are evidence-based on the list that are intentional behaviors that you and I can practice. And as we're practicing this, it's really important, and again, this comes up in so much of the research, that the sense of belonging and connections helps us thrive. So really looking at what are the quality of relationships. And I think with Gen Zs and millennials, it's a lot of, the quantity. How many Facebook, Instagram, TikTok friends do I have? It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Does that individual, including myself or a parent, have one or two people that I can be unconditional in terms of accepting, and I can be myself and I can be me? And there's that unconditional acceptance and love. So that quality of relationships is key, not the quantity, because we can have lots of friends and still be incredibly lonely and isolated. So this kind of gives us hope and buffers us. And we need to look at, how do I teach our kids in terms of to get relationships that help nurture them and foster them, in terms of that it doesn't just happen. We have to work at it and be proactive. And again, we've got to be creative in terms of how we do connect virtually. But those sense of communities and that sense of belonging, we've got to keep that going as we are trying to thrive. And kind of leaving you with tonight, as we're wrapping up, is, how do we as a community, as a family, help you thrive? Right? We know that there are different things in terms of embracing, like I said in the beginning, each other's strengths, recognizing that. And again, I think having a stance of curiosity is so important. We all jump in and make assumptions. We all make statements of, you did this or you did that, going back to the sibling fighting, which was a great question, is we've got to look at, give the person the benefit of the doubt and ask those I statements. I always say to individuals, take you out of your vocabulary. When you start a sentence with you, the wall goes up and people get defensive. Ask, I need, I would like, or I'm hearing. All those great I statements are really, really important. And in terms of just kind of acknowledging, asking more questions rather than making assumptions, defining values, right? Our values are changing. I'm hearing a lot more people say, I am valuing my alone time. I'm valuing my family time. I'm valuing things that are important to me, self-compassion, giving back to others, doing things that are meaningful to me, spirituality, whatever it is. And then in terms of vulnerability, this is really, really important in terms of with the values, because the values anchor us, it grounds us. And then in terms of what's important to us, as well as, kind of helping us move through of, if I'm doing what I value, then I can come to a place of being joyful and being happy and living by that. But vulnerability is also in terms of where we want them to be. And we need to show how we have bad days, how we recover, and basically just that we're human, and really role modeling that. And I think that's really kind of what I've seen in my own practice as a parent, is that's a game changer in terms of recognizing that if mom has a bad day, then it's okay if I have a bad day. Again, it's how we respond to it, and respond to it is what's key, and modeling the appropriate ways of using the coping skills. And again, creating meaning. That how am I creating meaning every day, where I'm having those conversations where I'm being with the child, asking them, what was your high point today? What were you proud of? What did you put a smile on your face? That's going to create the meaning every day as we're in the midst of going through all of this together. And lastly, flexibility is knowing that you and I have to pivot left and right, different times, different things are thrown at us all the time, every day. And so we're having to change our way of kind of like being every day with everything that's coming at us. So how can I ride the wave? And rather than, why me? I always say we've got to time the pity party. It's okay to have a pity party, but I've got to time it, because I then need to move through in terms of looking at how do I ride the wave where I move through it and I don't stay stuck. So really, really important in terms of the flexibility. And I think as we're wrapping this up, this is so hard. It is so trying, but it is goals that we need to have that we're self-aware, that we're conscious, intentional. And I always say being proactive in terms of to uphold all of these different things every day. So again, I really thank you in terms of being present, being part of our conversation. I am going to shift in terms of talking about giving questions and answers that I'm seeing that have come in the chat. And as I'm ending too, of just, may you be proud of the work you do, the person you are, and the difference you make, because all of you are making tremendous difference. Again, I think we don't do enough of recognizing it within ourselves, within our children, within our communities. And that's a real big piece of helping us thrive. So let me quickly, in terms of go to the chats in terms of the Q&As as we're kind of shifting of like looking at this. So how do you create quality family time when we are spending so much time together dealing with distance learning, working from home, and everyday stress? Great question. I think what's so important with this is there are times where family time, I think it goes back to kind of redefining and creating it to be differently. Sometimes family time needs to be alone time. Everybody needs to kind of go and do their own thing and come together. So I think the thing is get a pulse and get a read, kind of like the emotional temperature of where the family's at. You don't want to force things of like, we've got to have dinner together every night, or the have-tos, because the have-tos become shoulds, and the shoulds then become high expectations, which then create more problems. So really kind of looking at, is quality family time, sometimes it's I'm having a 15-minute conversation with one of my children, or having a conversation in terms of what made them happy, or, you know, playing a game or doing something, or even asking them, what do you need right now? I think that's one of the most important questions we can ask them is, how can I support you? What do you need? And I've gotten the answer from my kids of, I need my alone time. I want to be alone right now. And it's, you respect that and you walk away because that is empowering. And they're telling you what they need. We've got to listen to that. So again, I think it depends. I think really it goes back to, we've got to define that sometimes quality family time may be shorter, and it's maybe asking different family what they need and what they want in that moment. And it may look differently for different people. But again, I think sometimes we're needing more breaks because we're all together at once. So it's the quality, it's not the time, it's the quality, and the meaning behind the connection. So really, really important in terms of, and a great question. So any special tips for parents or toddlers? Yeah, my kids are not toddlers, and my heart and empathy goes out to individuals that have younger children, because I think that it has got to be trying and much more difficult in terms of having to be present for younger children. And I think in terms of, you've got to take those mental health breaks. You know, I teach, and we call them cognitive breaks, whether it's on Zoom or just, you know, day to day. So again, some of the interaction may be shorter, but you want to do it shorter so that the quality is there and the connection is there. You've got to refuel yourself. I always say, I start some of my workshops that I do of, when you and I go on a plane, they say, put the oxygen mask on us first and then put it on our child next to us. We are not putting the oxygen mask on ourselves enough, in my opinion, and that's what I see. So we've got to rejuvenate and replenish us before we can be there for others. So really kind of looking at, am I still doing that so that I can be there? But in terms of just, you know, creativity, withdrawing, and doing things that the individual, the toddler, the child, the adolescent, really having conversations of, what do you like to do? Is it drawing? Is it playing a game? Is it, you know, sitting here playing Candyland or something? So really in terms of asking them, what do they like to do, and doing more of that. Because sometimes we just kind of do things rather than asking and kind of looking at what's helping them thrive and helping them feel good about themselves, and putting a smile on our face and having those joyful moments. How can you help a teenager that's not motivated or excited about school? We see that that is so common. And I think really owning the fact and having the conversation that their motivation and excitement looks differently before COVID versus now. It is what it is, and it kind of looks up about the small accomplishments that we're making. So maybe getting out of bed is an accomplishment, and being very proud of that, right? To me, an accomplishment for my kids is they get up without me asking and get ready for school and get online without being prompted. That's wonderful. We celebrate that. So really kind of looking at your motivation level for yourself as a parent, including myself, as well as our kids, is going to be different. So it's, how can I, if I'm having a tough time motivating myself on a certain day, what decisions and what can I do differently? And a lot of that is taking breaks. A lot of it is, a lot of us practice mindfulness and meditation. Lots of great apps, like USC Mindful app has meditations as short as 2 minutes. There's Headspace, there's calm.com, so many great things. And with younger children, in terms of like having them take in a deep breath and pretend that they're blowing out a bubble. So helping motivation in terms of the mindfulness and meditation is really, really key, because we see that with the stress, the most important thing that you and I and our kids can do is decrease the heart rate, because physiologically that's sending messages to our brain that we're stressed out, which then is creating the fatigue and the lack of motivation and concentration. So the best thing we can do is, again, help with the physiological response. And a lot of that is taking breaks, the mindfulness, the meditation, and doing things that are enjoyable, and making sure that if we are having Zoom fatigue, that we're having the breaks that we need. So, and definitely in terms of, I'll take a few more questions because I'm aware of the time. That one of the things too is that in terms of connections and, how do we keep our kids connected with their friends? Because we know that that is so important. And that sense of belonging and community, like I said, is a predictor of thriving that we see in the research. So in terms of talking to them about what do they want to do, who do they want to reach out to, and really also sometimes they may not want to reach out to someone, and also giving them choices and options. That's the bottom line, or choices and options helps empower them, it helps empower us, and really kind of being there for what they need. And I think in terms of that, really looking at, another question's coming in about stress, about distance learning, that we know that this is so difficult and that it is tiring and we're sitting in the same place. So really kind of like, I'm always kind of checking in, are they taking breaks? Are they doing things on the side to help rejuvenate? Or, as I was actually asking my daughter, my older daughter, I just said, what advice, I was just curious in terms of what advice would you give parents, as I was kind of, again, looking forward to this talk. And she said, if you're having a bad day, just let them be and give them kind of mental health day in terms of just letting them do what they need to do to take care of themselves. So really having that conversation, I thought it was interesting of what is it that we need to do to hit pause. And that could mean, I can't make it to this class, and reaching out to the teacher or taking that break. So I think it's in terms of looking at what is decreasing the stress for that individual and doing more of that. And then I think in terms of one of the last questions too, I really like, of how do you invite the conversations of someone seeing the glass as half full without dismissing the feelings? Great question. And that is that we never want to dismiss them, because we never want to stuff them, dismiss them, minimize them. We want to take, like I said, the positive and the negatives at all time. But if I'm stuck in the emotional, like I said, with the coping, we're either avoidant, emotional, or problem solving. If I'm stuck in the emotional, I have to kind of look at, I am looking at it in with filters or blinders on of all the negative around me, all the negative things that happened to me, and kind of looking at, what am I grateful for? What happened that I'm proud of? So again, it's just expanding. So it's not minimizing the negativity, but it's expanding our kind of blinders, where we're just focused on this, which then creates how we react and how we feel. So we need to take it and integrate it all in, rather than one or the other, because being all positive and not looking at the suffering will get us into trouble too, which is then the avoidant. So really kind of looking at both of them. And then in terms of, I think what's really important too is someone says, and I'll end on this, of like, how do we talk to our kids about the increase in youth suicide and feel assured that this is not an option? And how do we know that they are really resilient? Great question, and so important, because we know with the research and the statistics, between 10 and 24, it is the second leading cause of death. So we need to have these conversations. We need to decrease the stigma and the barriers of mental health. And I think, it's really important, as when we look at this, our mental health is our state of mind. Our mental health relates to all of us, and the mental illness is about where we're then impaired and we can't do things day to day because we have symptoms, and we then may have a disorder. So when we talk about suicide, this is something we have to have a conversation about. And one of the most important things that you can do within your community, with yourself, is you need to talk about it directly. If you think that someone feels helpless and hopeless, and they're talking about death and dying and dark thoughts, asking them, have you thought about suicide, is the most important thing of being direct about it. And because if we don't, we're not going to get the information we need, and they may think, well, I can't talk about it because they're not opening it. And people think there's a myth out there that if I talk about it, it's going to increase it, when it actually does the opposite, it decreases it. And so we have to have these conversations. And so, always kind of, looking at, knowing what the resources are in terms of if I do need professional help or a consultation, really important. But talking about it is the most important thing as well. And how do you know that they're resilient? That we'll end with, it's hope. And that's another great question, is hope is what buffers so much of it. So if someone has goals, if someone has a future-oriented kind of mindset of like, I want to do this, and this is meaningful, and these are my goals, and very future-oriented and with lots of hope, that is where that's what we call a protective factor that helps buffer against a mental illness or something in terms of like suicide. So in terms of really looking at resiliency and are we thriving, is, are they upholding the values that are true to themselves? Are they practicing these skills and knowing that this doesn't just come naturally? This is about practicing, being proactive and being intentional, and that this is about moving through the pain and the suffering that we're all in, rather than staying stagnant and stuck. We are going to be stuck for a certain period of time and have to grieve and go through certain things. But again, we want to eventually get to moving through it to the end goal of acceptance and coming out on the other end in terms of, what did I learn from that? What could I do differently? And using the self-compassion and the mindfulness and looking at how do I cultivate and increase the optimism. So really, really important and good questions. The other thing too, and I'm seeing that we still have a little bit of time, is any suggestions on how to support our older parents, right? And they look to this as, many of us are part of the sandwich generation. And this is in terms of, how do you support the older parents? And a lot of us are concerned about the older parents in terms of COVID, keeping our distance. But again, how do we help create that connection in terms of, how do we be creative, and how do we virtually connect, and how do we still, even though we have to be distant, still keep connected? And what does that look like? And a lot of times it's scheduling phone calls of like, I'm going to connect with you every day at 6 o'clock, or making sure that you get that FaceTime. And in terms of doing things of like, maybe, you know, you're doing activities or watching movies online together. So there's so many things that I'm seeing people do that are much more creative, of watching Disney movies together online, that you can still connect with people and loved ones from a distance, but having to be more creative and still connecting with them, where there's still a sense of community that, again, we all need to help move through all of this. So I think what we'll do is we will wrap up at this point. Again, I appreciate you being here. I just wanted to do, again, a thank you to South Bay Families Connected for having this discussion, having this dialogue. This is a constant in terms of learning and what can I do to keep practicing these skills. Having this dialogue is so, so important to our community. And really a big thank you to Tessa Garner, the coordinator that helped bring this together, and Laura McIntyre that really helped bring this together and have me join you all. So please know that as we're ending, the webinar will be recorded and will be posted on South Bay Families Connected, the website, as well as the Beach Cities Health District YouTube channel. For parenting resources, which we all need and need to kind of look at, of visiting the southbayfamiliesconnected.org. And then for more information about COVID-19, mental health resources, and Mental Health Awareness Month, please visit bchd.org. So good night, be well, be strong, and be kind to yourselves, and have a great night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you.